In this lecture, we'll talk about one other technique that's often used to explore the internal capabilities that one has vis-a-vis competitors. And this is called a relative strength matrix or competitive matrix. And it's an attempt, in a sense, to quantify where one fits vis-a-vis competitors and who you want to think about, who you want to worry about, those kinds of things. So we'll talk about it. It quantifies something and seems to have a level of precision. It makes me a little bit uncomfortable professionally because it implies a level of precision which is probably more than what this particular analysis technique actually has to offer. But it is very useful if you keep in mind that it is a way of quantifying something that is really a qualitative exercise. What you try to do is rank various competitors on various factors. You might look at the value chain, strategic groups, those kinds of dimensions, all of that sort of thing, and you determine what key factors are, and then you estimate a value and you put a weight. Like if total is 1, you might have 0.2 or 20% is its cost structure, and 30% is its differentiation, something like that. Various factors we'll talk about specifically in a minute. But you put those factors together, and then you build a matrix that looks at how you fit with vis-a-vis competitors. Essentially, the highly weighted strengths, that is the things that are like 30% or 0.3 or 0.5, those are things where someone has a strong competitive position vis-a-vis those items. Low ratings, you might have a 0.1 or something like that. That means that this particular competitor is weak in that area. In terms of strategic reach, Walmart has stores everywhere, so they'd be a very high competitive strength, 0.8, 0.7 if you might do it. But again, as you see, it's relatively arbitrary. Before we talk about how one actually assigns these things, let me just make a comment that this kind of analysis generally works better in groups because you have a group of people that bring different perspectives to the table, and you essentially get the mean or the average, the consensus view out of a bunch of informed experts, and that number is likely to be closer qualitatively or closer to the value that one individual, any one of those individuals might have. Because I might say 0.7 for Walmart, someone else might say 0.5, someone else might say 0.9, whatever, and in that particular case, that is the weighting. But if you do it as a group and you come up with a consensus number, you have consensus in the sense of some sort of like average of the group. You have a perspective of multiple people that allows you to not only quantify something which is qualitative, but also provide a general perspective of how the management team thinks about the strategic situation of this company and its competitors. So you make a list of some of the key success factors like we did earlier in Module 1. You figure out how you might measure the competitive strength, different kinds, and you usually try to find several different ones. You assign a weight to each of these competitive strengths, measurements, and we'll look at an example in a moment. And then you rate the firm and your rivals and the competitive environment, and you do all of this, and then you crank out the spreadsheet. That's why I say it has a level of precision. It appears to have a level of precision which, as you know, inputs determine the validity of the outputs. But here's an example. You have your quality of product and performance. You have reputation. You have the manufacturing capability. You can see some of these different possibilities. You have a weight for them in terms of their value. And then you have various companies and what their strength is and what their weighted score is and all of those sorts of things. And you figure out where each company fits, or each competitor, and where you might fit vis-a-vis these various rivals. Who is competing with you on quality? Who is competing with you on price? Who is competing with you on reputation or on their innovation scale? Any of these success factors. And that gives you just another way of thinking about where you fit and how you balance with your competitors. Value chain analysis, this kind of analysis, resource and capabilities, benchmarking, all of this work comes together to help us understand and figure out where our scores are, where our strengths are, where our potential for opportunities reside, who we're likely to come up against, so we can do more analysis of what they're likely to do, and then try to exploit the strengths and then take some defensive action to recover some vulnerabilities. If you have a higher cost supply chain, you might need to gird that up a little bit with some additional activities. For example, if you're manufacturing in the US and your manufacturing costs are higher, a competitor is manufacturing in Asia and their costs are lower, you know that's a vulnerability because your core costs are lower. There's two ways you can respond. You can try to lower your cost, or you could take advantage of the fact that you're an American manufacturer and try to differentiate along those lines. So you could see that it raises questions about how one capitalizes on or recovers from potential vulnerabilities. Overall weighting is better, and obviously, and you can determine where you seem to be strong, and that's typically where you actually focus your energy on becoming stronger in those areas. You also have to look at the ones that are very strong in some area. They become some targets where you might want to benchmark how they're doing. They also show that certain companies might be rivals on specific capabilities. You can see someone stacks up to you side by side as a very strong competitor. You might want to think about how one deals with a competitor that is like that. Sometimes a merger in that scenario, if there are two players that are very similar in the market, they're likely to have a common culture, common focus. There might be an opportunity to merge so that you don't compete each other to death. But you might also want to take them on. So there's different ways to be thinking about what how this might mean and what strategies that you take going forward. So what you're trying to do with all of these various things is come up with what are the key issues we need to deal with. Do we need to deal with our supplier situation? Do we need to deal with our manufacturing costs? Do we need to differentiate our product in some way? Do we need to enhance our distribution channel and maybe expand into another industry? Oftentimes companies start at a high-end retailers. Is it time for us to go down market a little bit and distribute through lower market retailers? What is going on in that scenario? And that's what we'll talk about in the last lecture in this module. How do you then frame this all out into some key strategic issues? We'll talk about that in the next lecture.